Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something absolutely wild. We're breaking down the high-stakes logistics and the intense, almost unbelievable strategies behind trying to outrun an entire police force for 12 straight hours. Now, what might just look like a massive game of hide-and-seek on the surface is actually a masterclass in asymmetrical tactics, resource management, and pure psychological diversion. We're going to jump right into this citywide evasion event and look at exactly how a small, scrappy team tried to outwit a completely unified law enforcement division.
Okay, let's set the stage because the stakes here are absolutely massive. Picture this: 5 creators, 100 real-life cops, and a whopping $500,000 on the table. The rules of the challenge were straightforward but honestly grueling. The 5 suspects had a 12-hour timer. If they could just avoid getting arrested until the end of the day, they'd keep their freedom, their pride, and win a ton of money for their moms. But if those 100 cops successfully hunted down and cuffed every single one of them before time ran out, the police department would take home that massive $500,000 prize.
It's literally the definition of asymmetrical warfare. You've got sheer brute force numbers going head-to-head with months of elaborate, chaotic preparation. On one side, the police force is relying on totally traditional law enforcement techniques, right? Overwhelming manpower, coordinated communication, flashlights, and organized straight-line physical sweeps. But on the flip side, you have the suspects. The organizer, Jimmy, spent months rigging the city. We're talking underground sewer tunnels, dozens of doppelgangers, secret walls built into schools, and actual tactical gear, like ghillie suits. It's just a fascinating clash between traditional search methods and totally unconventional evasion tactics.
Let's map out this chaos really quick, keeping in mind that surviving meant outlasting the cops until the very end of the day. The sheer pressure cracked the team almost immediately. Just 10 minutes into this 12-hour chase, contestant Darius was completely surrounded and arrested. Gone. This obviously forced the remaining 4 into a super tense, hyper-vigilant state. By the 3-hour mark, they had to make the incredibly tough strategic call to split up at a subway station just to divide the police's attention. And as we track this forward, the timeline culminates at the 10.5-hour mark, which brought about the final inevitable capture.
Section 1. Evading the police sweep. Let's look at how the police actually swept the city.
So, once the initial adrenaline wore off, the police systematically structured their hunt. They relied on a super classic tactic called the skirmish line. By linking up horizontally and moving forward as a single massive unit, they theoretically make sure nothing slips past them across the entire city grid. It's incredibly effective. But Jimmy realized the one fatal flaw in this plan. Once a skirmish line passes an area, the cops don't suspect anyone to be hiding behind them. So in just a brilliant countermove, Jimmy led his team into the underground sewer system. They literally just waited beneath the streets as the skirmish line walked right over their heads. Once the cops had passed, they popped back up into the quote-unquote cleared territory, totally bypassing the main police sweep.
Moving on to Section 2, decoys, tunnels, and traps. This is where the active diversions come into play. To counteract those sheer police numbers, staying static for 12 hours was basically impossible. Eventually, the cops were going to check every single building. So, Jimmy's solution? He unleashed over 50 doppelgangers into the city, just a masterstroke. All of them were dressed identically in black, all wearing the exact same backpacks. He directed this massive crowd of clones to just run straight into a local movie theater. Naturally, a huge group of cops spotted them, called for backup, and rushed inside to make a mass arrest. But the moment the cops were in, one of Jimmy's team members locked the only exit from the outside. The cops were totally trapped in the lobby. And just to rub salt in the wound, Jimmy played a video on the theater screen of himself counting all the way up to 100,000. It was a massive, perfectly executed drain on police resources.
But the evasion required them to constantly be leveling up. Actually, contestant Nolan had to complete a literal side quest right in the middle of the chase, which was sponsored by COD Mobile, just to get a strategic advantage. It wasn't just a basic hiding spot, it was an interactive puzzle. Nolan had to navigate to a specifically locked safehouse shed. Once he got inside the outer perimeter, he was forced to sit down and literally win a 2 versus 2 multiplayer match in Call of Duty Mobile. Only after securing that win could he access the final lock, and hilariously, that lock turned out to be the simplest code possible, 000.
But unlocking that door was totally worth it because it gave him access to this incredibly overpowered arsenal. It completely changed the dynamic of the chase. This wasn't just fun gear, it was a total tactical reset. The ghillie suit allowed Nolan to blend invisibly right into the foliage. The night vision goggles meant they could navigate in the dark perfectly without turning on flashlights and giving away their position. But for sure, the absolute crown jewel in that shed was the live UAV tracker on a tablet. It was basically a live map showing the exact GPS locations of the police officers in real time. Suddenly, the suspects could anticipate the police movements instead of just constantly reacting to them in a panic.
Which brings us to Section 3, the underground jailbreak attempt, basically risking absolutely everything. So despite having all that top-tier gear and successfully avoiding capture for 10 hours, Jimmy and Nolan decided to risk the entire game. With only 2 hours left on the clock, and knowing that their friends Tarek and Darius had been sitting in a holding cell all day, they made a highly questionable, but honestly incredibly dramatic tactical decision. Like Jimmy himself admitted, breaking their friends out of a police holding cell might have been the dumbest thing they could possibly do. But camaraderie and that prize money for their families pushed them right underground, straight into the belly of the beast. They were intentionally walking towards the absolute highest concentration of police officers in the city using a miles-long tunnel.
Well, as you might guess, their presence was blown almost immediately by a guard. As they crept near the actual jail cells, an officer spotted them, and pure panic ensued. They bolted back down that miles-long tunnel, and despite dropping a tactical smoke grenade to blind the pursuing officers, the cops were just too organized. They swiftly communicated via radio to seal off both ends of the tunnel. So in the ensuing chaos, team member Allison made a massive play. She intentionally stopped and surrendered, allowing herself to be captured so that Jimmy and Nolan could slip out of a small hole and escape the tunnel system.
Section 4, cornered, the final capture, running completely out of time. That ticking clock was rapidly working against them now. By this point, Jimmy and Nolan were exhausted, they were totally running out of hiding spots, and the police had completely reset their skirmish line. This time, they converged on a specific container yard and the surrounding wood line. With just an hour and a half left on the clock, Jimmy and Nolan were fully surrounded. The fugitives were pushed out of the structures and straight into a dead end. The police established a rock-hard perimeter and flooded the woods with flashlights. Despite the ghillie suit, Nolan, along with Jimmy, was finally apprehended. Ultimately, the sheer numbers of that police force proved impossible to evade for a full 12 hours, meaning the 100 cops successfully won the $500,000.
And finally, Section 5, the $1 million book twist. A massive final twist.
Just when the chase seemed to wrap up with the straightforward loss for the creators and a massive payday for the police, Jimmy pulled one final, incredible trick out of his sleeve. Before officially going to jail, he seamlessly promoted his brand new book. He proved this whole massive stunt was partly just a genius marketing maneuver. He co-authored a book with legendary writer James Patterson titled The Most Dangerous Games. And the plot actually mirrors the massive stakes of this exact event, featuring 100 contestants competing for $1 billion to save humanity. But here is the real kicker. He tied a real-life $1 million giveaway for a reader to the book's release. He leveraged the absolute climax of this insane police chase to launch a major publishing project.
So it leaves us wondering about the ultimate game of hide-and-seek. What tactic would you deploy if 100 cops were hunting you down right now? Would you rely on high-tech gear and UAV trackers? Would you dive into the underground infrastructure or maybe lean heavy into psychological warfare and decoys? The logistics of this event show that both overwhelming force and chaotic ingenuity have their limits. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep analyzing, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next one.